You know, it's a most curious thing. When a person begins to awaken, when they begin to see through the noise of their own mind, through all the chatter and the constant evaluations, they don't become more dramatic. They become quieter. They don't want to shout about enlightenment from the rooftops. Nor do they form a club about it. No. They start to drift towards stillness, as if the universe itself were drawing them back into its center. And then something quite paradoxical happens. The moment you begin to rest in that peace, the world around you becomes oddly unsettled. People start to treat you as though you've changed into something strange, perhaps even dangerous. They might say, "What's wrong with you? You've lost your ambition. You don't get angry anymore. You don't seem to care about what's going on." And you have to smile, because what they really mean is, you're no longer participating in the panic. You see, our civilization is built upon a very peculiar rhythm, an anxious rhythm. Everyone's heart seems to beat in time with the ticking of the clock, as if they were hurrying toward a finish line no one has ever seen. And when one of us steps out of that tempo, when someone stops dancing to that frantic tune, it creates a ripple of unease. The others begin to feel the stillness, and it reminds them of something they've been avoiding, themselves. That's why peace can look like rebellion. Not because peace is aggressive, but because it doesn't play the same game. The ego's world thrives on opposition, on argument, on the comforting illusion that there's always a battle to fight. And when you, in your quiet way, refuse to fight, the ego around you starts to panic. It says, "You must be against me," because it cannot imagine a life that isn't built on conflict. But true peace, real, unshakable peace, is not opposed to anything. It's not the opposite of war. It's not the silence that follows noise. It's the silence in which the noise happens. It's the still water beneath the waves. And when a human being begins to live from that still water, the waves around them suddenly realize they have no control over the depth. The waves, which are other egos, begin to crash more violently, not to destroy the peace, but because they sense that something far deeper is calling them, and they're afraid to answer. And so the paradox of peace is this: the more you find it, the more it seems to disturb the world that has forgotten it. Not because peace wants to disturb, but because it reveals the disturbance already there. When you stop reacting, the world reacts to your lack of reaction. When you stop trying to fix others, they may accuse you of indifference. When you stop chasing illusions, those still trapped in them might call you lost. But you must understand, that is how awakening works. It's contagious, but not in the way people expect. It doesn't spread through persuasion or preaching, it spreads through presence, through a quietness so profound that others begin to sense it, even when they don't understand it. They might resist it at first, they might project their fears upon it, but something in them recognizes that stillness as home. So, when your peace seems to upset others, do not rush to defend it. Don't try to explain yourself. Don't turn the silence into another argument. Simply see the comedy of it all, that a species capable of building telescopes to peer into the edge of the universe still trembles at the sight of a calm human being. Laugh gently at that absurdity, because your calmness is not their enemy, it's their invitation. And that is the beginning of the story. How awakening, which is nothing more than remembering your natural state, appears to the world as strangeness, aloofness, even threat. But it is none of those things. It is life remembering that it was never broken, never lost, never separate. Now, let's look a little closer at what happens when that peace of yours unsettles the world. It isn't really the world that's disturbed, it's the ego that lives in it. You see, the ego is a rather delicate creature. It's always pretending to be strong, but its strength is a disguise, like armor made of paper. It depends entirely on opposition to prove it exists. If nobody challenges it, it begins to fade. And that frightens it more than anything else. The ego, my friends, is a game of pretending to be a separate somebody inside a skin, a little bubble of consciousness cut off from everything else. And because it imagines itself as separate, it must constantly defend that boundary. It must say, this is me, and that is you. This is right, and that is wrong. This is mine, and that is yours. It cannot help itself. It must divide the world. For without division, it has no outline, no identity. And so the ego goes about constructing a fortress of words, concepts, judgments, opinions. It surrounds itself with stories of who it is and who it must never be. It says, I am clever. I am spiritual. I am hardworking. I am misunderstood. Whatever the label, the ego wears it like armor. And then, when something or someone comes along that doesn't play by those rules, the ego shouts, intruder! That's what happens when you start to wake up. Your presence becomes a mirror. And the ego cannot bear to see its own reflection. Because when you stand there not competing, not defending, not performing, it suddenly has nothing to push against. The whole mechanism trembles. It says, wait a moment, if this person doesn't take offense, how do I know I'm righteous? If they don't argue, how do I prove I'm right? If they're content, how do I know I'm better? The ego's entire drama depends on your participation, and when you stop participating, it panics. It's like a dog barking at a shadow. It barks louder, not because the shadow is dangerous, but because the silence is unnerving. You might notice this in very small, everyday ways. Someone criticizes you, and instead of defending yourself, you simply listen. They grow angry, not because you've hurt them, but because you didn't play the game. Or perhaps you refuse to gossip, and suddenly you're accused of being aloof. What's really happening is that the collective ego, the little agreements of illusion between people, has found a leak in the hull. The ship of pretense has been punctured, and truth is flooding in. But here's the deeper trick of the ego. It even tries to sneak back in through spirituality. It will say, ah, yes, now I am not like those unconscious people. I am awakened. I am humble. I am beyond the ego, which is the most splendid ego game of all. The moment you think you've transcended the ego, it's already wearing your robe, smiling proudly in the mirror. So what to do? You see, there's nothing to do, because the ego thrives on doing it, wants to fix, to improve, to achieve enlightenment as another possession. But awakening is not an achievement. It's the end of the achiever. It's the recognition that there never was anyone to defend in the first place. When you see this clearly, not as an idea, but as an experience, the ego's defenses collapse by themselves. You don't destroy the ego, you simply stop feeding it. You stop mistaking the chatter for the self, the little voice that says, I must be loved, I must be right, I must survive, becomes like the sound of wind in the trees, pleasant, sometimes noisy, but harmless. And then something extraordinary happens. All that energy that used to be spent in defense becomes freedom. You begin to flow with life, not as a strategy, but as a spontaneous movement. The world stops being a battlefield and becomes a playground. You realize that even the ego, with all its noise, was part of the cosmic comedy necessary, perhaps, to set the stage for awakening. So, when others' egos rise up in your presence, when they try to argue, criticize, or define, you don't see enemies, see performers. They're acting out the ancient play of me and you, unaware that it's all one consciousness pretending to be divided. Smile and let them play. For in the end, the only defense against the ego's game is not resistance, but laughter. You know, one of the most unsettling discoveries on this curious journey of awakening is that your mere presence begins to function as a mirror for others. You don't have to say a word. You don't even have to intend it. Just by being there clear, still, unguarded, you show people what they are unwilling to see in themselves. And that, my friends, can be quite an uncomfortable business. For most of us, we live surrounded by a hall of mirrors, but every one of them is fogged with steam. We only ever see what flatters us, what confirms the image we're trying to hold together. But then along comes someone who doesn't project or defend someone who simply is. And suddenly, all the fog begins to clear. The ego catches its own reflection naked, and it panics. That's what happens when you stop playing the usual games. People will sense, perhaps unconsciously, that something about you isn't participating in the old illusions. Your calmness doesn't meet their anger. Your silence doesn't confirm their gossip. Your openness doesn't respond to manipulation. And so, their ego starts to squirm. It feels exposed, because the stillness in you illuminates the movement in them. It's a funny thing, really. The ego says, "You've changed. You're different. You've become cold, detached." But in truth, you haven't changed. You've simply stopped reflecting their drama. They mistake your clarity for distance, your gentleness for weakness, your acceptance for passivity. Yet, what's actually happening is that you're reflecting back their own noise, their own confusion. It's like holding up a mirror to someone who's been making faces. They see the silliness of their own expression and feel embarrassed, perhaps even angry. Now, the important point is, don't take that reaction personally. It isn't really you they're reacting to. It's the mirror. You have become the mirror, and the mirror is utterly impersonal. It simply reflects. The awakened person doesn't radiate moral superiority. They radiate clarity. And clarity, to an unexamined ego, feels like confrontation. You see, reflection is not always flattering. Imagine standing in a perfectly still lake. When the water is calm, you see yourself precisely as you are. But if you're splashing about, kicking, waving, trying to fix the ripples, your image distorts. That's what most people are doing in daily life. Constantly disturbing the surface of consciousness with judgment, fear, comparison. When they meet someone whose water is still, their own turbulence becomes visible by contrast. And here lies the gentle power and the hazard of awakening. Your presence becomes diagnostic. It reveals where others are still asleep, not because you want to show them, but because awareness naturally exposes illusion. Light does not intend to cast shadows. It simply does, by shining. But don't misunderstand this. You are not called to be anyone's therapist or savior. To turn your awareness into a tool of correction is to fall back into the game of superiority. The task is much simpler. Stay as the mirror. Let people see what they see. Some will recognize their reflection with gratitude. Others will cover it quickly, or break the mirror altogether. Both reactions are part of the same dance. There's a story in Zen of a monk who came to his master and said, "I've achieved great serenity. Now everyone I meet seems angry or lost." And the master replied, "Good. Now you can finally see the world as it is." That is, the mirror effect awakening doesn't make the world worse. It reveals the suffering that was already there. You begin to see, with painful compassion, how deeply everyone is trapped in the dream of self and other, right and wrong, mine and yours. But this recognition doesn't have to weigh you down. On the contrary, it liberates you from the fantasy that you must fix anyone. Because once you realize that their reaction is merely their own reflection, you no longer need to defend, persuade, or perform. You simply remain present, open, luminous, and let life take its course. Eventually, some will look into your eyes and see, not threat, but home. They will glimpse their own depth in your stillness and fall silent. That moment of recognition, brief though it may be, is the beginning of awakening in them. Not because you taught them, but because you were willing to be a clear mirror. And so, when others resist you, bless them silently. They're not rejecting you, they're resisting the reflection. But the reflection will keep appearing again and again through countless forms and faces until one day they stop long enough to see themselves clearly. And in that instant, the mirror and the image will vanish into the same light. That, my friends, is the strange alchemy of awakening. You disturb others not by your noise, but by your silence. Not by what you do, but by what you no longer need to do. You become a mirror in which the universe rediscovers its own face. Now, this is where many sincere souls go astray. The moment they begin to taste awakening, they feel an overwhelming urge to teach. They rush out to save the world from itself. They want to explain enlightenment to their friends, correct their parents, enlighten their lovers, and they say, if only you could see what I see, everything would be all right. But my dear friends, that's just the ego, slipping back in through the back door wearing holy robes. It loves nothing more than a good mission, because the ego cannot stand to be nobody. It will happily become somebody who's awakened. It will transform from the sinner into the Savior in one glorious costume change. And so we find the paradox. Preaching, however well-intentioned, almost always fails, because the very act of trying to convince another implies that there's something wrong with them and something right with you. The moment that assumption enters, the whole vibration changes. The still lake becomes turbulent again. You are no longer a mirror, you are a salesman. And no one likes being sold enlightenment, especially by someone who's smiling a little too peacefully. You see, truth cannot be imposed. It can only be recognized. And recognition happens when you stop trying to make it happen. If you go around with spiritual advice like a hammer, everyone you meet will start to look like a nail. But awakening is not a hammer, it's a song. You cannot force someone to dance. But if you start moving to the rhythm yourself, they might feel the beat and begin to sway. This is why I say that play saves you. Life, at its root, is play, what the Hindus call Leela, the divine play of existence. The universe isn't a factory churning out enlightened beings. It's a cosmic theater improvising with infinite masks. When you understand that, you stop trying to preach the script and start enjoying the performance. Think of the laughter of a child who builds a sandcastle with perfect seriousness and then destroys it with the same delight. That's the spirit of the awakened being, completely involved, but never trapped. He doesn't preach to the other children, you must learn the secret of impermanence. He simply laughs as the waves wash it all away. And somehow that laughter teaches more than 1,000 sermons. So instead of trying to convert others, invite them to play. Let your joy, your ease, your humor be the sermon. When someone comes to you in conflict, don't answer with doctrine, answer with dance. Not literally unless you feel like it, but inwardly, playfully. Let your words move lightly, as though you're teasing the cosmos rather than explaining it. When you treat life as a game, people relax, and in that relaxation, they may glimpse what you mean by awakening. There's a story I've always loved. A monk once asked his master, "What is the secret of enlightenment?" And the master said, "When hungry, eat. When tired, sleep." The monk frowned. "But everyone does that." The master laughed. "Do they? When they eat, they are already planning tomorrow's meal. When they sleep, they dream of success. I eat when I eat, and I sleep when I sleep." That's play complete presence in the simple act of being. And when you live like that, people notice. They might not call it enlightenment, they might call it ease, warmth, grace, humor, but they'll feel it. And without your saying a word, they'll begin to remember that they, too, can play. The trouble with preaching is that it's built on tension. You must understand this now. But the secret of play is relaxation. You cannot force a flower to bloom by pulling on its petals. You simply provide the right conditions, light, warmth, stillness, and it opens by itself. The same is true of people. So let them bloom. Let them awaken in their own season. Be the sunlight, not the gardener's impatient hand. When you speak from play rather than pressure, your words become music. When you act from joy rather than duty, your presence becomes healing. And when you laugh at your own seriousness, others are freed to do the same. That's why I say, don't preach the truth, play it. Because life is not a problem to be solved, but a riddle to be danced with. And only when you stop trying to win the game do you realize you were never separate from the players. So the next time someone challenges you, if you're so enlightened, why aren't you angry? Just smile and say, "My dear, I'm far too busy dancing." You see, my friends, one of the subtle traps of awakening is the idea that because you've seen through the illusion, you must now tolerate everything, never speak up, never draw a line, never say no. But that, too, is a misunderstanding. A saint without boundaries is not a saint. He's a sponge. And life did not bring you into this marvelous human form just to be stepped on. True compassion does not mean letting others trample your peace. It means seeing the dance for what it is and moving with it intelligently. The boundary is not a wall of fear. It's a membrane of clarity, alive and responsive, like the skin on your body. It lets in the sunlight and the air, but it keeps out the knife. In the same way, an awakened person moves through the world, porous but protected. You see the madness of others, the projections, the manipulations, and you don't condemn them. You understand that they are acting out the drama of the ego, the ancient play of me versus you. But understanding doesn't mean submission. Awareness allows you to say, "This is enough," without hatred. "I won't join this game," without arrogance. For most people, boundaries are made of anger. They shout, "You can't treat me like that." And in that very shouting, they're already caught again in the web. But when awareness speaks, it doesn't shout, it simply ends the conversation, like a candle going out when the wind blows. Not in resentment, but in completion. There's no pride in it, no sense of moral superiority. It's just the intelligence of life protecting its own harmony. You see, there's a difference between reacting and responding. Reaction comes from fear. Response comes from understanding. The awakened person doesn't react to insult because they no longer believe in the character being insulted. But they may still respond with firmness, even with what looks like sharpness, because love sometimes wears the face of refusal. A gardener who pulls the weeds is not being cruel to the garden. This is what I mean by boundaries without superiority. You act, you speak, you draw your line, but you don't imagine that makes you better or purer. You do it as naturally as your lungs exhale carbon dioxide and inhale oxygen. The balance maintains itself. There's a story from Taoism about a wise man who was asked, "How do you stay pure in a corrupt world?" "How?" And he answered, "By not pretending to be pure." You see, the moment you think, "I am above this," you've already fallen below. The moment you say, "I will love unconditionally, no matter what anyone does," you've set yourself a task that belongs only to God, and you'll fail at it gloriously. But if instead you stay awake, moment to moment, you'll find that love knows when to open and when to close, when to embrace and when to walk away. Sometimes walking away is love. Sometimes silence is the most compassionate word. And the beauty of it is you don't have to decide with your head. The intelligence that beats your heart also draws your boundaries. It's the same wisdom that tells the tide when to rise and when to fall. People will sometimes accuse you of being selfish when you live this way, because you're no longer ruled by guilt or obligation. But you can smile because you know the truth. Selfishness and self-awareness are not the same thing. Selfishness defends a fragile identity. Self-awareness simply recognizes that you are the whole field and therefore must not let any part of it dominate at the expense of the rest. When you refuse to be mistreated, you're not rejecting the other person, you're refusing to participate in their delusion. You're saying, I see your suffering, but I won't suffer with you. And that, paradoxically, is often the greatest kindness. For in time, they may see that your stillness was not rejection, but invitation, the invitation to step out of the storm. So do not confuse meekness with wisdom, nor aggression with strength. The tree that bends in the wind survives the hurricane, not because it's weak, but because it understands the nature of the wind. Hold your center, let your roots run deep, and you will find that boundaries arise effortlessly, as the expression of love itself, love that does not exclude, but neither indulges illusion, love that says yes and no with equal grace, love that knows when to stay and when to walk on, whistling softly, still in peace. Now, it often happens that once you begin to live from this stillness, from this ease that no longer defends or attacks, you will find the world suddenly eager to test you. People will misunderstand you, provoke you, or challenge you in ways you thought you had transcended long ago. And your first thought might be, haven't I evolved past this? Haven't I already learned these lessons? But that, you see, is precisely the next lesson. Because every person who irritates you, every situation that frustrates you, is a hidden teacher. The universe, with exquisite humor, sends you mirrors disguised as enemies, mentors wearing the masks of fools, and they appear not to punish you, but to reveal the places where you're still pretending to be separate. There's an old Zen saying, the obstacle is the path. That means the thing you think stands in your way is, in truth, the very door to freedom. But we're so eager to escape discomfort that we miss the invitation it carries. The moment someone criticizes you unfairly, or a plan falls apart, or life seems to contradict your serenity there, in that moment, the mirror is being polished. The divine hand is showing you exactly where you still cling, where you still demand control. It's an extraordinary discovery to realize that the people who irritate you most are often your greatest teachers. Because irritation is simply energy pressing against a boundary you still believe in. When someone's anger makes you uneasy, it's showing you where your peace is still conditional. When someone's arrogance offends you, it's revealing your own hidden pride. When someone's fear drains you, it's pointing to your own unexamined vulnerability. Every encounter becomes a sermon if you're willing to listen without judgment. The awakened person begins to recognize this pattern, and laughter arises. You laugh not at the other, but at the divine trick of it all, that the universe is endlessly creative in teaching you about yourself. It doesn't only send you gurus in saffron robes. Sometimes it sends you the rude driver, the gossiping neighbor, or the colleague, who always must be right. These are the secret Buddhas, hiding in plain sight. And if you see them clearly, you might bow inwardly and say, "You've shown me another corner of my illusion." Now, this doesn't mean you must enjoy pain or seek out conflict. It simply means that when conflict comes, you stop seeing it as a mistake. You stop saying this shouldn't be happening and start wondering, what is life trying to show me through this? And in that shift from resistance to curiosity, transformation begins. Because the moment you stop fighting reality, reality becomes your friend. When you see conflict as a mirror rather than an attack, it loses its teeth. You begin to respond, not from ego, but from awareness. Sometimes that response is silence, sometimes it's laughter, sometimes it's a clear, gentle no. But in every case, it's free. There's no residue of resentment, no self-congratulation for being spiritual. There's only the simple flow of life correcting itself, like water finding its own level. In this way, awakening deepens not in meditation halls or mountaintop caves, but in supermarkets and traffic jams, at dinner tables and offices. Every irritation, every misunderstanding becomes an invitation to return home to your center. And gradually, you begin to feel gratitude for what used to bother you, because each sting, each insult, each disappointment was really polishing the mirror, making it clearer, brighter, more transparent to the light. So the next time someone triggers you, try a little experiment. Before you respond, pause for a moment and ask, what in me is reacting right now? Don't analyze it, just see it. Maybe it's pride, maybe fear, maybe the old need to be seen as good or wise. Whatever it is, notice it without judgment. That simple seeing already dissolves it. For when light falls on a shadow, the shadow cannot remain. In this way, conflict ceases to be a curse and becomes a companion, a rough but honest teacher walking beside you, making sure you don't fall asleep again. The awakened person doesn't seek trouble, but neither do they run from it. They meet it with a bow, a grin, and a silent thank you to the infinite intelligence that knows precisely how to wake us up again and again and again. Now, as we begin to see the humor in all this, the conflict, the irritation, the endless mirrors, something marvelous dawns upon us. We realize that even the ego itself, that noisy little actor who insists on being the star of every scene, was never an enemy at all. It was part of the choreography, part of the great cosmic dance. You see, the universe is a vast game of hide and seek. Awareness hides itself in forms, in you, in me, in the cat, the mountain, the ocean, and then pretends to forget. It covers its own radiance with masks of personality, stories, ambitions, fears. And then, through the miracle of awakening, it begins to remember again. But it could not remember unless it had first forgotten. There is no awakening without sleep. There is no self-realization without the drama of the self. So instead of despising the ego, you begin to bow to it not as master, but as teacher, for it gave you contrast. Without the noise, you could never appreciate the silence. Without the confusion, clarity would have no meaning. Without the sense of separation, union would have no sweetness. The problem, you see, was never the ego itself. It was our identification with it. We thought the role was the whole play. We mistook the mask for the face. And when we finally laugh at that, really laugh, the spell begins to break. We see that every conflict, every argument, every I and you was just the universe playing both parts. Imagine two waves on the ocean, arguing about who is higher, who will last longer, who has the right shape. And all the while, it's the same water rising and falling. That's the human condition. The argument of the waves is the laughter of the sea. The fight itself is the proof of unity. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that we become indifferent or passive. It means we begin to see life as art, not as a battlefield, but as a symphony. The ego's struggles, the triumphs, and the tragedies are not mistakes. They are movements in the music. Awareness listens to them all, not judging, not fixing, but enjoying the play. When you truly understand this, compassion blossoms naturally, because how could you hate another wave when you know it's your own water? How could you condemn the noise of the storm when you hear it as part of the rhythm of the ocean? Even those who seem lost, violent, greedy, they are not separate. They are simply playing their roles in the divine theater. You don't have to applaud every scene, but you can appreciate the performance. And perhaps you'll notice something delightful. The more you see life as play, the lighter you become. You no longer carry the world on your shoulders. You move through the crowd as though through a dance, stepping aside here, turning there, sometimes leading, sometimes following. The music plays through you, not from you. The awakened person does not withdraw from life, they participate more fully, but with no attachment to the outcome. Whether the music is soft or stormy, they keep dancing. They know that the dancer and the dance are not two. Awareness and the ego are not two. They are the stillness and the motion of the same mystery. And so, what once felt like opposition becomes rhythm. What once looked like chaos becomes choreography. The ego acts its part. Awareness observes and embraces it all. This is the reconciliation, the marriage of heaven and earth within you. At last, you stop fighting with yourself. You stop trying to be pure or perfect. You simply are. And in that simplicity, there's laughter, deep, free laughter that comes from knowing that even your confusion was part of the perfection all along. The dance continues endlessly. Awareness moves as you, through you, beyond you. And when the music changes, when another wave rises and this one falls, nothing is lost, because the ocean never stops. It only changes form, now wave, now foam, now deep, dark stillness. That's the secret. The ego was never the villain. It was the rhythm by which the infinite kept time. Now, of course, it's one thing to understand that life is a dance, and quite another to remember it when the wind begins to howl. Because the waves of life don't stop just because you've awakened. The world still storms and shouts, people still quarrel, the mind still flickers. The question is not how to escape the storm, but how to stand in the middle of it and remain rooted in peace. You see, there's a difference between calm weather and calm being. Most people imagine serenity as the absence of disturbance, clear skies, quiet seas, no interruptions. But that kind of peace is fragile, because it depends on the conditions of the world. The peace of awakening, however, is not the calm of the storm, it's the calm within it. The eye of the hurricane never moves. The wind spins wildly around it, but the center is perfectly still. That center is your awareness, what you truly are, before the story begins. Thoughts come and go like gusts of wind, emotions rise and fall like waves, but awareness itself remains unshaken. When you recognize this not as a concept but as a felt reality, you begin to live from the center rather than from the circumference. And here's the beautiful part. Staying centered is not something you do, it's what you are when you stop trying to control the storm. The moment you stop grasping at calmness or pushing away chaos, the balance restores itself. You see, the storm feeds on your resistance. The more you fight it, the more it howls. But when you yield, when you say, "Ah, yes, here comes the wind again," suddenly there's no friction, and the wind passes through you harmlessly. Think of your breath. You don't command it, you allow it. You're not consciously saying, "Inhale, exhale," it happens by itself, guided by that ancient intelligence, which keeps your heart beating and the stars burning. In the same way, peace is not created by the ego's effort. It's revealed when you stop interfering, when people insult you, when chaos swirls around you, when your plans collapse. Remember to come back to the breath, to the body, to the immediacy of this moment. Feel the soles of your feet, the air moving in and out. Be the witness of the commotion, not the actor caught in the script. Because you see, the moment you witness the storm, rather than becoming it, something extraordinary happens. You realize the storm is also you. It's your own energy, dancing in different forms. The awareness watching and the whirlwind whirling are two sides of the same movement. The art of staying centered is not about tightening your focus, it's about relaxing it. The more you cling to stillness, the more it escapes you. But when you let go completely, you discover that you were never off-center in the first place. Even your moments of fear and confusion were perfectly placed in the grand design. The wise person doesn't avoid tension, they dance with it. They turn anxiety into rhythm, anger into motion, sorrow into depth. Nothing is rejected, nothing wasted. As the Taoists say, the soft overcomes the hard. Water, the gentlest of substances, can wear away the mightiest stone. Why? Because it never resists. It bends, it flows, it yields, and in yielding, it triumphs. So, when the world pulls you in 1,000 directions, when you feel torn between duty and desire, noise and silence, don't try to solve the chaos. Just return to the place before the question arose, the space of awareness itself. That space is not found in thought. It is what thought arises in. The center is not something you reach, it's what remains when you stop running. And the miracle is, from that unmoved place, you can move with perfect freedom. You can act, decide, love, and create without being possessed by the outcome. You become like a dancer who trusts the music. You don't control the rhythm, you ride it. Remember this, storms will always come. The world will not stop being the world. But the awakened one has found the still point in motion, the silence that sings through every sound. And once you know that silence, you can never lose it, even in the loudest room, because it isn't something you have, it's what you are. So don't be afraid of the storm. Be the space that contains it. Be the awareness that watches it spin. And when the wind roars, bow to it, smile, and perhaps whisper, "Ah, yes, there you are again, my old friend." You know, once you begin to live from that still center, another marvelous thing happens. You start to discover what love actually is, and it's nothing like what you were taught. Most of us have been told that love is an emotion, a passion, something you give and receive, something that depends on how another person behaves. But the love that arises out of awareness has no object. It's not directed toward this person or that. It's more like a fragrance that appears when the flower of being opens. You don't do it, it happens. This love has no opposite. It isn't the contrast to hate, nor the sentimental warmth we feel when everything is pleasant. It's a kind of seeing, a silent understanding that everything you meet is yourself in disguise. The angry man, the frightened child, the cruel stranger, all of them are ripples on the same sea that you are. How could you hate them once you see that? You begin to notice that love doesn't always look gentle. Sometimes it's fierce, sometimes it says no, with the same tenderness that says yes. Because true love isn't about pleasing others. It's about seeing them clearly and allowing life to be exactly what it is. When someone attacks you, love doesn't rush to defend. It simply understands. It sees the suffering behind the anger, the confusion behind the cruelty. Love doesn't excuse the behavior, but it no longer takes it personally. It recognizes that every act, however distorted, is a movement of the same universal energy consciousness trying to remember itself through the fog of fear. And in that understanding, forgiveness becomes unnecessary because there's nothing left to forgive. You can only forgive someone if you still believe they wronged you. But when you see that they were never truly separate from you, that both of you were waves in the same ocean, then what's there to forgive? The tide rises, the tide falls, and the ocean remains. This love is silent because it doesn't need to explain itself. It doesn't need to announce, "I love you." It is love. It speaks through presence, through the way you listen without interruption, the way you move without hurry, the way your eyes rest gently on the world without judgment. And perhaps the most beautiful thing about it is that it has no agenda. It doesn't try to fix or convert or save anyone. It allows others to be exactly as they are, asleep, awake, angry, kind, and yet holds them all in the same boundless regard. This is why the awakened person can sit among all sorts of people and feel completely at ease. The saints, the sinners, the seekers, and the skeptics all are playing their part in the divine theater, and awareness loves every role equally. You might notice, too, that when you live this way, you stop needing people to understand you. You stop demanding agreement or validation. Whether they praise you or reject you, it doesn't touch the core anymore, because you realize that the love you are seeking is the very substance of your being. The paradox is that when you no longer try to love, love begins to radiate through you effortlessly. You become transparent, and life shines through your form like light through glass. Every glance, every breath, every silence becomes a blessing. You don't love this or that, you love being itself. And so, love becomes not something you feel, but something you see. It's the recognition that nothing in this universe has ever been truly outside of you. It's the simple, wordless realization that what you are looking at, the person before you, the sky above, the ground beneath your feet, is the same consciousness looking back through different eyes. This is why, in the deepest sense, love needs no words. Words divide, love unites. Words describe, love is. When you rest in that seeing, you find that the heart no longer asks for assurance. It doesn't chase, it doesn't cling, it doesn't defend. It just beats quietly, steadily, joyfully, in rhythm with the whole cosmos. And in that rhythm, every act becomes a gesture of affection. Existence itself becomes the lover and the beloved, meeting eternally in this one moment which, when you really see it, has never begun and will never end. That is love not as emotion, not as obligation, but as pure understanding, silent and complete. After all this talk of awakening, of awareness, of mirrors and oceans and silence, one begins to wonder, what happens next? What becomes of a person who sees through it all? And the answer, curiously enough, is nothing special. They go on living, eating, sleeping, walking, working, but something subtle and profound has changed. The difference is not in what they do, but in how they do it. The awakened person returns to ordinary life, but no longer as a prisoner of it. You see, before awakening, the world seems terribly serious. Everything feels like a test. Every conversation, a performance. Every mistake, a potential tragedy. Life is heavy because we believe our identity is at stake. But once the spell breaks, that heaviness vanishes. You realize that existence is more like a play than a courtroom. You don't have to prove anything anymore. You just have to play your part fully, gracefully, and with a bit of laughter. Washing the dishes becomes as sacred as meditation. Drinking a cup of tea becomes communion. Paying bills, driving to work, sitting in traffic, all of it, the great and the small, becomes one continuous act of participation in the divine dance. The awakened one doesn't divide life into spiritual and ordinary, because such divisions were part of the illusion to begin with. You realize, with a chuckle, that the marketplace and the monastery were never two different places. The divine was there in the sound of coins, in the cry of a baby, in the hum of the refrigerator. The world you once wanted to escape turns out to be the very expression of the truth you were seeking. And so, you move among people just as before, but something inside has relaxed. You no longer carry the anxious need to be understood, to be liked, or to be successful. You still play your roles, parent, friend, artist, worker, but you wear them lightly, like costumes in a play. You can take them off at any moment, because you know you were never just the role. You are the stage on which it all unfolds. People may not notice anything remarkable about you, and that's perfectly fine. You might look, from the outside, completely ordinary. You may still make mistakes, laugh too loudly, forget your keys, spill your tea. The difference is that now, none of it disturbs your center. You fall out of awareness and return again, as naturally as breathing. There's no striving left, no guilt, no pride, just an unbroken intimacy with the flow of life. And here's a delightful irony. When you no longer try to be extraordinary, you become radiant. People may not know why, but they feel something around you, an ease, a spaciousness, a quiet joy that asks for nothing. That's what happens when awareness walks through the world wearing human clothes. It doesn't preach, it doesn't convert, it simply lives, and in living, it invites others to remember themselves. This is why the great mystics and sages always return to the marketplace, to the ordinary rhythms of human life. They sweep the floor, cook the meal, mend the shoes. They laugh with friends, weep at funerals, and pay their taxes. They've discovered that the divine doesn't exist apart from these moments. It shines through them. Enlightenment, you see, is not an escape from humanity, but the fulfillment of it. When you look closely, you'll find that nothing has changed, yet everything is transformed. The streetlight glows with a quiet beauty. The laughter of a child feels like the universe giggling through a tiny mouth. Even the rain dripping from the roof becomes a kind of music. You walk through the same world, but it no longer weighs on you. You are no longer in the world. The world is in you. And so, the awakened person doesn't withdraw from society. They blend in, like salt in the sea, invisible but indispensable. Their life becomes a living reminder that freedom is not found at the top of some spiritual mountain, but in the way you tie your shoes, wash your hands, greet a stranger. Because, in the end, awakening isn't about what you know, it's about how you live. And how you live, once you've seen the truth, is very simple. You live now, fully, freely, lovingly. Each moment complete in itself. And when you live that way, there is no ordinary life left, only life itself, vivid and eternal, appearing as breakfast, traffic, laughter, and rain. So, at last, we come to rest. After all the words, all the imagery, all the laughter and paradox, there is really only one thing left to do, and that is to be still. Not to stop the world, but to stop the idea that you were ever separate from it. To see that there is nothing to reach, nothing to hold, nothing to resist. Take a breath and notice the breath breathes itself. You are not doing it, it's happening. The same intelligence that spins the stars, that opens the flowers in spring, that shapes the clouds and the rivers, that same rhythm is moving your lungs right now. You are not living life. You are being lived by life. And so, sit for a moment in this recognition. Feel the weight of your body, the heartbeat, the air on your skin. Everything is happening by itself, perfectly. Thoughts come and go, sensations rise and fade, and yet something here is unmoved. That which is aware of the breath is not the breath. That which observes thought is not the thought. That which witnesses the changing moods of the heart is not bound by any of them. This awareness, this open, luminous space, is what you have been all along. It was never born, so it cannot die. It is not inside you. Rather, you appear within it. It is not yours. It is you, the true you, beyond the mask of the name, beyond the story, beyond time. When you see this directly, not as an idea, but as a living experience, something marvelous happens. The world, which once seemed full of conflict and division, begins to shine again as one seamless movement. The trees, the sounds, the faces, the pain, the joy, all are waves upon the same sea of consciousness. And you are that sea, dreaming of being a wave. Now you see why awakening is not about becoming holy or special. It is about becoming ordinary in the most extraordinary way, simply what you already are, before you thought you had to be anything else. There's nothing to defend anymore, because there's no one to defend. There's nothing to chase, because you were never lacking. There's nothing to control, because the one who imagined control was part of the flow itself. In this recognition, a quiet joy arises, not the joy of excitement, but the joy of rest. The burden of becoming falls away. You realize that you don't have to earn the right to exist. You don't have to understand the meaning of life, because life itself is the meaning. So let everything be exactly as it is. Let the world whirl and thunder and whisper. Let others awaken or sleep as they must. You simply remain as the unmoved center, not separate from the movement, but the stillness within it. And if you listen carefully, beyond thought, beyond expectation, you might hear a faint laughter, the laughter of the universe remembering itself. It laughs through your breath, through the rustle of leaves, through the sighs and songs of humankind. It's the laughter that says, "Ah, yes, it was never serious." And so, my friends, the play goes on. The dance continues. But now, you know the secret. The dancer and the dance were never two. The sound and the silence were never apart. And you, the one who listens, are the still point around which it all turns and in which it all rests. Now, be quiet, not as an act of discipline, but as an act of recognition. For this simple awareness, right here, right now, is the truth you were seeking. It has always been so, and it always will be.